Clearly, industry have been told that Schedule 4 will be opened up or relaxed.
I call Gareth Hughes.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Kia ora, ngā mihi nui kia koutou kia ora. I rise to take a call on this committee stage, the Crown Minerals Permitting and Crown Land Bill. We're looking now at the title and commencement clauses of this legislation. In earlier calls, I talked about how it could be called the Petrobras Law. Perhaps we could call SOP 205, which is and now will be included in this legislation, the Anadarko Amendment. Also suggested we could maybe call it a bridge too far because of the way it tramples on our constitutional and human rights and the freedom to protest, which successive New Zealand governments and generations have held as an honourable tradition and a key part about what it is to be a New Zealander, someone who sticks up for our values and our principles on the world stage. In earlier calls, the Minister directly labelled a number of questions at my direction around economic management, and this is why I'd contend actually this legislation should be called the Crown Minerals Lazy Economic Gamble. I say lazy economic gamble because this is the heart of the government's economic strategy. We've seen the worst economic performance in 50 years, yet 51 years, Ms Dyson says, and all the government can point to is oil and gas as their strategy. Now, we've seen some economic benefits in Taranaki, and I'm the first to say the Green Party isn't opposed to shallow offshore drilling. We're not opposed to onshore drilling. We think we should have a transition strategy because, look, even the International Energy Agency, hardly a bastion of radical green thought, are saying we need to leave 80% of the oil we already know about, not discounting the stuff we don't know about, which Anadarko and Petrobras were prospecting for. We have to leave 80% of it in the ground if we're going to avoid runaway climate change. So the Greens, we're not opposed to onshore shallow drilling. We think we should have a transition strategy. But look, this isn't an economic strategy for the country. We've got such a high unemployment rate at the moment, yet when we look at Taranaki, it's got the lowest job creating potential of any sector in that economy. When you look at their economic stats, for every $1.2 million of GDP, you only see one worker employed in the oil and gas sector. In agriculture, it's 15, and retail, it's 33. I'm the first to acknowledge there are many high-paid jobs, but if jobs are your question, oil and gas isn't the answer to be building a large number of workers. Take the government's East Coast Oil and Gas report. The most likely scenario there said we might see 199 jobs. Now look, I'd love to see 199 extra jobs on the East Coast because that region's really struggling under this government's economic stewardship. But this region has lost more than 900 jobs in the first 4 years of the National Government's term in manufacturing alone. So even if the most likely scenario went ahead and we saw dozens of fracking wells up and down the East Coast, the region is still going backwards under national. So if jobs is the question, and it rightfully is, oil and gas isn't the answer. It's a lazy economic gamble because the entire premise is hoping that some foreign offshore company will come down here, find something and sell it offshore. There's hardly any value add, there's hardly any benefit for our economy. Look, we've got the fourth lowest royalty plus tax rate of any oil producing nation in the world. We're going to benefit less than most other nations in the world. Simon Bridges' predecessor, Phil Heatley, made it easier to bring in foreign offshore oil workers. He amended the immigration rules and made 11 oil worker positions able to be expedited through the skilled shortages list. So we know there's going to be less New Zealanders working in the sector. So this is why I think it should be called the lazy economic gamble. It's lazy, there's no innovation, there's no planning, there's no strategic thought, there's no sense of where the global economic trends are going and how New Zealand can shape its economy, how we can turn this direction, how we can address some of the structural imbalances in our economy. It's lazy because clearly the trends are moving away from oil. This is what the International Energy Agency says, this is what the International Monetary Fund says. In the last month we've seen reports from HSBC and others such as Standard & Poor's saying that actually we're seeing, with the risks of climate change and global high energy prices, a similar occurrence to the subprime mortgages in the States, because essentially these oil assets, some of these big oil majors have, are toxic because they cannot be developed at the moment. So all the trends are going in one direction. When you look at the Bloomberg New Energy Finance report from 2011 that showed for the first time ever more money was invested in clean energy than fossil fuels, first time ever in 2011, this is the direction we should be taking our country. So instead of a Crown Minerals lazy economic gamble bill, we should have a new energy bill to focus on the current century's economic trends. And this is what PricewaterhouseCoopers says when they say we could have a $22 billion economic opportunity in clean energy. It's what the likes of Mr. Chair.
Gareth Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's what the likes of Pure Advantage say in their recent report on the green economy, that we could see not only 3,000 jobs, which is the Energy Minister says we could see if we develop an entire new petroleum basin. Of course, that's direct and indirect jobs. But we could see 50,000 green jobs in New Zealand if we embraced clean energy. You see the likes of Greenpeace saying 100% renewable is possible. We could be saving $600 million per annum. We could be reducing that $8 billion fuel import, which I contend is one of the most significant strategic threats to our economy, and the government's deficit is of a similar order of magnitude. Making a dent in that $8 billion fuel import bill would make a huge difference to the Crown books. So instead of a lazy economic gamble that bets it all on the hope that foreign offshore oil companies find something, which again is still up in the air, I understand our exploratory wells are on the order of less than half the likelihood of offshore averages to strike oil. We're called a frontier region to the offshore oil zone. What we know, of course, is we're going to see hardly any royalties, hardly any taxes, hardly any jobs for New Zealanders. All the profits are going to flow offshore, but then we're going to face 100% of the environmental risks. And this is what my motivation is, because I don't want to see oil washing up on our beaches. I don't want to see our agricultural, our tourism, our horticultural sectors devastated by an oil spill. And what we know is the exploratory drilling phase, which is what we're talking about with this government, is the riskiest phase. A month ago, the European Union put out a report saying exploratory drilling is the riskiest phase. Because what we're talking about, deep-sea oil drilling, is operating at the frontiers of geology, geography, technology. We're talking about an environment, you know, a kilometre or deeper, or just off my hometown, Wellington, where the permit we've recently, the government has given to the very same company that had a 25% stake in the Deepwater Horizon $40 billion oil spill, Anadarko, is 2.7 kilometres down. Here the pressure would crush a person in a second. It's pitch black, close to freezing. Yet the oil they're prospecting for is coming out close to boiling. And it's the frontiers of geology and technology, because we just still don't know what's down there, despite advanced and modern 3D seismic survey and computer mapping tools. You can still have an accident. That's what we've seen in Azerbaijan. That's what we've seen with the Montara blowout in Australia in 2009. That's what we see with the Deepwater Horizon. Now, the spill there had an oil exclusion zone almost as large as the North Island. Tragically, I don't think we were well enough prepared for the Rena oil spill. We struggled with 300 tonnes of oil entering our marine environment. There, with the deep-sea oil blowout, we saw up to 600,000 tonnes of oil enter the environment. The US government had 1,000 vessels, 40,000 people working on that spill. Maritime New Zealand, and New Zealand's got 3 vessels. Well, they're really dinghies. They're the same, similar size, the skimmers. We've got approximately 200 to 300 staff. Our oil spill response capacity is minuscule compared to the US government. We're a frontier region, far from international oil infrastructure, and when the only solution to the Deepwater Horizon blowout, the relief rig, which drilled a relief well to take off the pressure so it could be capped, this is possibly the most worrying factor for New Zealand, because this Crown Minerals Permitting and Crown Lands Bill does nothing about protecting us by having a relief rig in New Zealand waters. When I got the Parliamentary Library in December last year to map where relief rigs capable of drilling depths of where we're planning to drill exploratory wells in New Zealand were located in the southern hemisphere, I understand there were three in the entire Asia Pacific and Indian Ocean regions. We could be waiting months, weeks or months for a relief rig to finally travel to New Zealand, if it can be found, if it can be contracted, to finally drill a relief well and plug a well. So until we can get a guarantee from this government, until we can get a guarantee from the industry that we won't see oil spills, similarly to the shallow drilling in New Zealand, which has been done on the whole pretty well in New Zealand. Until we can see similar safety standards in New Zealand, the Green Party is going to say no to deep-sea oil drilling, but we are going to say yes to clean energy. We are going to say yes to clean energy jobs. We're going to say yes to an accurate and fair carbon price which has a level playing field. We're not going to pick winners in oil and gas, which is what the government's doing. We're not going to throw tens of millions of dollars of seismic surveys. We're not going to literally call out the Navy and change the laws when people get in the way. The Green Party is going to have a smart, future-focused economy. We're not going to introduce legislation that could be called Mr. Chair.
Call Damien O'Connor. Honourable Damien O'Connor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.